Webheads, I'm about to show you 10 memorable comics of my lifetime. Hey, all my webheads out there, welcome back to Comic Book Corner 2.0. And fans, I'm your host, Mike Spider Slayer, helping you make decisions of what comics to buy. And today, guys, we are going to be talking about 10 of my most memorable comics in my lifetime. These are some of the books that were highly anticipated, super hyped up, things that I read that just totally blew my mind at the time, or recent, whatever the case may be. And I thought this would have been a fun list for you guys to actually see what impacted my comic book life, right? So before we get started, if you like this video at any time, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell, and if you want to become a member, hit that join button as well, as it supports the channel. So here we go, guys. Let's kick off this countdown. This one is going to be a fun one, starting with number 10. And number 10, it goes to Superman issue 75. We all know it, right? It's the death of Superman. Now, it's one thing to read this book, right? And when you read it, it's kind of like, oh, Superman's dead and he came back to life. But if you were alive at the time or old enough to appreciate this book, when it was released, it was monumental. This was mind-blowing, right? This book sold over 6 million copies in 1992. People were lined up out the doors, out the shops to pick up this comic book. And then when Superman died, it was like, holy shit, Superman is dead, right? And I couldn't believe it when I read it, but my God, this was an impactful comic. And people bought tons of this book thinking that they were going to be like millionaires 30 years from this point. Little did we all know that they mass produced these comics, obviously, because they sold 6 million of them. And now they ain't worth shit, and Superman is alive once again. So, nevertheless, it was a very, very memorable comic, and most people that were around at that time, they remember it, and you'll never forget that particular story. All right, so next, coming in at number 9, this goes to Spawn. This is issue 1. Now, this was the birth of Image Comics. Todd McFarlane was red hot. Him and, of course, the other Image founders like Liefeld and Larson and Valentino all went in there and they created this new company. And little did we know that Spawn was going to be this huge hit still today. I mean, we're on issue 306 now or something like that. This book came out in 1992. It sold over 2 million copies. And I remember when I saw this book at the stands, I'm like, Spawn. I'm like, he's just like a Spider-Man with like, magic. That's what I thought, because we all know how he drew. He looks very much like Spider-Man, all his poses and his, everything that the way McFarlane drew, it was like, oh my God, that's crazy. So everyone wanted to check out Image Comics. They all wanted to see what McFarlane did. And so this was a pretty cool comic book at the time, right? All right, next, coming in at number 8. Now, this one I don't think broke any records, but for me, this was a really good story. And this one was Green Lantern issue 48. This was volume 2, the Emerald Twilight story, the birth of Parallax, and it leads into Kyle Rayner. So this was the first part of this story, and this was an amazing story. This was really the only thing I read from DC when I was younger. The resurrection of Coast City was amazing. Hal Jordan actually uses his ring to resurrect Coast City, and he gets punished for it, right? And he suffers all the consequences. He becomes Parallax. He kills all the Guardians. It's just a lead up to Kyle Rayner. And when Kyle Rayner was introduced into the DC universe, I loved the character. He was very relatable, and that's how I got into Green Lantern. back in the 90s. So this was a great read. It really introduced me to a Green Lantern and the only DC character I really liked at the time. So I really enjoyed that one. And if you haven't read that story, I definitely say pick it up. All right, next, this one you'll find pretty cool. This one is number 7 on the list, and this goes to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue 1, the Mirage Studio days. This was the birth of the Turtles, before they liked pizza, before they had real personalities, right? TMNT issue 1 came out in 1984. It sold just over 3,000 copies, okay? And my friend, I remember his name is Joe, who introduced me to this series right from the start. And it was my introduction to independent comics. You know, at the time, I knew Spider-Man and I knew, all the stapled superheroes. But this book was gritty. This book was violent. These guys had swords. Shredder got thrown off a building. It was black and white. And it was like, wow. For me at the time, I was like 9, 10 years old and my mind was blown when I saw this. And I wanted to get more of these issues. But little did we know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle was such a low print run that it was impossible to find, even in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th prints. So when I finally got a chance to read some future issues, I was happy. But man, this one really set the tone for me for comics to come when it came to independent comic books. All right, next, coming in at number 6. This one goes to Batman New 52 issue 1. This was the introduction of the New 52 and the New 52 Batman. This came out in 2011 and it really got me more into the character. People rag on New 52 all day long, and I'm one of those people after the initial launch, okay? But when it was introduced to the comic community, this was a great idea. This got people into DC Comics that maybe didn't know where to start because their universe is very convoluted with different Earths and restarts and things like that with Crisis. And with the New 52, I'm like, this is perfect. I'll jump into this version of Batman and we'll see where it goes. And let me just tell you, when I read it, Greg Capullo, Scott Snyder, it was fantastic. It blew my mind. The artwork was gorgeous. The stories were imaginative. The whole Court of Owls thing was so well done, right? So again, this really set the tone for me to get to know more about Batman, wanting to read more Batman, and introduced me to more DC characters as I wanted to read more about them. So this New 52 Batman issue 1 was really huge for me. All right, next, coming in at number 5, this one goes to The Walking Dead issue 100. We all know that The Walking Dead was really hot for quite a while, and this book really set the tone for independent comics to come, right? Robert Kirkman just hit it out of the ballpark when it came to The Walking Dead. And with issue 6, that was a really important one to me because that just changed the game. When Carl killed Shane at the end of that first story arc, I'm like, I'm on board because this was something I've never seen before. But with issue 100, this took it to the next level. This was the first time we got to see Negan as a character. And this was the time where he actually smashed the freaking Glenn's head. And when you're reading this book and you actually see this happen on the panels, you are just like, oh my God, I can't believe this. The expressions on the characters' faces. I actually had to turn my head while reading this book. I was absolutely shocked. Now, this book, I think, had a ton of orders. I think it had a total order of like 379,000 copies initially, and it had a ton of variants. This is a very memorable book, something that I will never forget ever in comic history on how Glenn died and the introduction of Negan. All right, next, coming in at number 4. This was back in the 90s. This goes to the Uncanny XMen. This is issue 281. this was the birth of the X-Men Gold team. This was the time that X-Men was red hot. I think Willis Portosino is the one that did the artwork. I actually have a copy of this signed by him. It is authenticated. I have a certificate on there. I got it through Wizard Magazine. And I remember X-Men was so popular. People were lining up out the door for this particular comic book. My shop was called Baseball Cards Plus when I was a kid. I used to ride my bike to it, and it used to specialize in baseball cards. But when baseball cards went down the toilet, comics were the next best thing. And what happens is, boom, comics are all over the place, and people are lining up to buy these types of books. This book introduced X-Men Gold Team, Jean Grey, Storm, Colossus, Archangel, and Iceman. This one was awesome. The artwork was great. And again, if you followed all the other X books at that time, this was the one that you must get. All right, now closing in on my top 3 most memorable books. This one goes to XForce issue 1. How could you not buy this book if you were around at the time? This book was released in 1992. This book sold 5 million copies. That's right, a Rob Liefeld creation, but the man was red hot. The biggest selling thing was all these X books, so why not create his own team, right? Which is X-Force. And not too much longer later that's when he would go to Image and create Young Blood, a very similar like team, right? But this was a huge book, and the thing that this book had was, you know, you couldn't just buy one copy. You had to buy many copies because New Mutants, right, type of characters, and they all had their exclusive trading card inside, and the comic was polybagged, so it was like, oh, I'm going to buy a bunch of them, and a particular card that was inside made another book worth more money, and just so people bought tons of these, same thing, thinking that this was going to be worth millions of dollars in the future, not knowing that a larger print run ruins, you know, the value of a comic book. So really, really cool book though overall at the time. All right. So coming in at number 2, and this might be a lot of people's number 1, but it's not mine. This one goes to X-Men issue 1. Released in 1991, over 8 million copies sold. This thing was gigantic. You know, it was Jim Lee's thing. Obviously, we all know that he's in DC at the time, but he was the red hot artist at the time. Everyone was glamoring over his artwork, and when he came out with this new team and variant covers for this one, everyone was going after this one like freaking hotcakes. So once again, everyone thought that this was going to be worth a ton of money, but it's just not now, you know. But at the time, when you went to that shop, man, there was a rush and everyone wanted to read this particular book, and it was awesome. And of course, this was around the time when the X-Men cartoon came out, so X-Men were everywhere. They were huge at Marvel Comics at the time. All right, so number 1, what makes number 1 on my list as most memorable comics at the time? Well, this one had to go to Spider-Man issue 1. This was another one that was highly anticipated. You could get your different variant covers where it came to just the regular newsstand edition, to the chrome edition, to the gold edition. They had all these different variant copies. This was released in August of 1990. It sold over 2.5 million copies, and the reason why it sold so well was because of McFarlane's artwork, right? I mean, it was so detailed. It was so different. It revolutionized the artist industry at the time, and people wanted to see his Spider-Man title that he drew and that he wrote, and people were all over this book. Again, this was another one of those books where I pre-ordered at the time. I was like, I must get this. But you cannot deny his artwork, even if the story may have not been the greatest, and maybe he wasn't on it the longest, but it was a really highly anticipated book. I have the regular cover, and I also have the chrome one that's also signed by him with certificate of authenticity. So really excited to have that. But again, those are my top 10 most memorable comics that I remember buying and highly anticipating at the time, whenever the time was. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun doing the research on trying to remember these comics and bringing this video to you. So I want to hear some of the most memorable comics in the comments section below for you. And I'll give you some of this other content to check out and watch. And guys, until next time, this is Mike Spider Slayer signing off, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys. Be good. Bye.